Hello fellow bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. I'm Marissa, and today I would like to talk about the books that Booktube made me read. So for my Booktube anniversary, Claudia from Spinster's Library asked me a great question. She asked, what's a book that you ended up loving that you wouldn't have picked up if not for Booktube? I thought about it and I realized that it's not just one book. There are a whole bunch of books and authors that I want to talk about for this. So I went through the books that I've read over the past few years and picked out some that I adored but would never have even heard of or considered reading if not for Booktube. And I'd like to share them with you now. Before Booktube, I had vaguely heard of Elizabeth Gaskell, but I didn't actually pick up one of her books until I heard many Booktubers rave about her. Kate Howe was probably the booktuber who made me most excited to pick up a Gaskell book. And Katie from Books and Things has this succinct description of North and South as a version of Pride and Prejudice, but with factories. And that, of course, caught my attention. So as a massive Jane Austen fan, I read North and South first, followed by Kate Howe's favorite, Wives and Daughters, which I loved as well. I fell in love with Gaskell's writing. Her books have such a quaint and cozy feel, and she just breathes life into the domestic sphere of the 19th century, as well as tackling some really important themes of fallen women and workers' rights. North and South and Wives and Daughters are now tied as my two favorite Gaskell novels. And besides reading those, I've also enjoyed Cranford, her first book, Mary Barton, and some of her shorter works, including The Moorland Cottage, Christmas Storms and Sunshine, and Lois the Witch. And I have her other two full-length novels, Ruth and Sylvia's Lovers, on my shelves, and I do hope to read them at some point, as well as some more of Gaskell's shorter works. I also credit Kate Howe and Lil's Vintage World for convincing me to read the Queen of Crime herself, Agatha Christie. I'm not a huge fan of the mystery genre, and I don't really read many mysteries, but I do read Agatha Christie now. When I was younger, mysteries gave me nightmares, and as I grew older, I found them to be rather formulaic and repetitious. And yet these booktubers have inspired me to gain a profound appreciation for Agatha Christie. I find reading her books so calming and cathartic. They're about so much more than solving murders. She creates these quirky, interesting characters and carefully examines their relationships with each other and human psychology in general. The first book I read by her is arguably her most famous, Murder on the Orient Express, and since then I've been inspired to read Murder at the Vicarage, The ABC Murders, and The Body in the Library, as well as, I think, Hercule Poirot's Christmas. There's a certain mood I'm in where I'm just really ready to curl up with a good Agatha Christie, and I think my next reads by her will be And Then There Were None, or The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, or Death on the Nile. Something else that I would have never picked up if not for Booktube are the Discworld novels by Terry Pratchett. I've read 9 of them at this point, but I would have never picked them up if it were not for Jean from Jean Bookish Thoughts. The books are about a disc-shaped planet balanced on the backs of 4 elephants, which in turn stand on the back of a giant turtle. There are witches and wizards, the character of Death makes an appearance. It just sounds utterly ridiculous and does not sound like the type of thing I usually like to read. But don't let the bizarre descriptions fool you. It's not your standard sci-fi or fantasy fare. Terry Pratchett is a master of comedic satire. His books poke fun at cliches and expectations and tackle important themes of religion, racial prejudice and exploitation, the role of government, and so much more. I feel like the genius of these books is overlooked in so many circles, and it's actually hard to come by them. I have a whole spreadsheet about the reading order of this series and where I can get the next one. And I'm actually not sure what the next book in the series is for me right now. I think it might be Moving Pictures. But anyway, every so often I'm in the mood for some Terry Pratchett and I pick up the next book. I'm ever so slowly making my way through his series. The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock is another book that I don't know if I would have been aware of if not for Booktube. I'm not sure which channel I originally heard about it on, but it was definitely making the Booktube rounds at one point. I think I might have been inspired to pick it up after watching the Reader's Athenaeum's review of it, but she doesn't make videos anymore, I don't think. Anyway, it was a phenomenal piece of historical fiction, and I feel like it's really rare that I have the opportunity to read about the 18th century as opposed to the 19th century. The book is about a merchant named Jonah Hancock, who finds himself without the ship that he is used to making his livelihood off of. Instead, he has been presented with a mermaid, a grotesque little creature, very different from the shiny, scaled, majestic creature that you may conjure to mind when you hear the word mermaid. Word spreads of Jonah's oddity, and his path crosses with a renowned courtesan, Angelica Neal, the most beautiful and captivating woman he has ever seen. The book is about the cost of ambition, gender expectations in the 18th century, and so much more, with a spark of magical realism at the end. I did a whole review on this one. I had so much to say about it. And I feel like this book was really popular on Booktube a while ago, but I don't hear people discussing it much anymore, which is a shame. I thought it was a really wonderful historical fiction book, and something that I hope sticks around. If you enjoy historical fiction and you haven't read The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock yet, I do recommend that you pick it up. I also would have never picked up We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson if not for Booktube. I don't know if I first heard about Shirley Jackson on Acacia Ives' channel or if she just had the most compelling things to say about Shirley Jackson, but I associate Acacia with my foray into Jackson's writing. I've read We've Always Lived in the Castle, The Lottery, and a biography about Shirley Jackson. Her writing is so peculiar and twisted and dark, but wholly enjoyable. She writes captivating domestic Gothic fiction that features Jackson's unique blend of creepiness and wit. Shirley Jackson is a brilliant and underrated author, and I'd love to read more by her someday. Maybe I'll read The Haunting of Hill House one day, but I'm actually a little worried that it's too scary for me. I also would not have picked up the brilliant book called The Clay Girl if not for Acacia. Her review of this book was so intriguing that I put it on hold from the library immediately and read it as soon as I could. It's about an 8-year-old girl who, with the help of her imaginary seahorse friend, Jasper, copes with the aftermath of her father's suicide and generally dysfunctional family. It's a coming-of-age story written like pure poetry with a sense of childlike wonder. I loved it so much that I bought a copy for myself after returning the library book. And I also would not have read Station 11 if not for Booktube, or more specifically if not for Katie from Books and Things. Based on the back of Station 11, I would not have selected it for myself. Dystopian fiction is just a genre that doesn't inherently intrigue me. And this book was very popular on Booktube. I had heard plenty about it. I just didn't think I would like it until I heard Katie's review. People cited it as YA and dystopian fiction, both general buzzwords that I steer clear from in my reading for the most part. But Katie's love for it somehow convinced me to read it, and I absolutely fell in love with this book and Emily St. John Mandel as an author. It's a dystopian book, but it's the most hopeful dystopian that I've ever been exposed to. And the way all of the characters' stories are connected by the end of the book is masterful. It's about so much more than a plague that wipes out 99% of the population. It's about the importance of art, and it's a beautiful exploration of legacy and the human condition. It will probably come as no surprise to those of you who watch my channel regularly, but the one person who has probably had the biggest impact in my reading over the past few years has been Katie from Books and Things. She happens to share many of the same interests I do in literature, and we very rarely disagree on a book. She's basically my reading soulmate, and I credit her with introducing me to so very many books and authors. A lot of what I read is something that Katie has previously read or something that we end up discussing and reading together. I definitely credit Katie with introducing me to one of my favorite authors of all time, Diane Setterfield. That's probably who I'd mention if you were to ask me who my favorite contemporary author is. I love Diane Setterfield's writing and the way that she weaves stories together like no other author I know. Her books are somewhat realistic, but they also have a flair for the dark, twisted, and supernatural, without it overwhelming the entirety of the book. She is just such a talented and miraculous author, and I am so thankful that Katie introduced me to her. I credit her with introducing me to some more obscure Victorian works as well as contemporary authors like Natasha Pulley and Yoko Ogawa, who I really wish more people on Booktube read and talked about. Seriously, Yoko Ogawa is talented. I've only read 2 books by her so far, Revenge and The Housekeeper and the Professor, but they have both stuck with me. I'm really in awe how the same author can write such different, albeit both really powerful books. Revenge is an interconnected short story collection that is beautifully written with an eerie air of grotesqueness. These stories are full of odd, gruesome details told in a calm, quiet, matter-of-fact tone, which, combined with the subject matter, makes the stories all the more unnerving. And the stories are connected by the most bizarre plot points. An entire post office full of kiwis, carrots in the shape of hands, the dead Bengal tigers, and hamsters, but it's somehow wonderful in its bizarre and grotesque way. And The Housekeeper and the Professor is a beautiful, subtle story about the relationship between a housekeeper, her son, and an eccentric math professor with a traumatic brain injury. The professor can't create new memories that last more than 80 minutes and is constantly interrupted in daily life to be reintroduced to those he has met since his accident. The book examines the beauty of math and the divine sequence of numbers, as well as memory, dependence, and the profound impact people have on each other. I can't wait to read more by Yoko Ogawa. I think her book, The Memory Police, was recently released. I'm not sure what it's even about, but I know I want to read it just because she wrote it. And Natasha Pulley's books are historical fiction with just the right dose of magic to them, but they also draw on literary traditions found in fantasy and sci-fi. She has such a talent for crafting complicated plots and writes in a style that was clearly influenced and inspired by all of my favorite 19th century novelists, and she's becoming a favorite author of mine in her own right. The Watchmaker of Filigree Street is definitely the best place to start with her work. These were just some of the most notable books that I would have never read if not for Booktube, but there are definitely more. Honestly, lately, it's hard to tell if the next read I pick up is influenced by a fellow booktuber or is just something I'm drawn to, and that's really part of the fun of Booktube. I'm exposed to so many more books that I don't know where my interest ends and someone else's influence begins. So anyway, I thought this was a really fun little exercise to do. I feel like I've seen other booktubers use this type of title for their videos, but I don't think it's an official tag. And I feel like a lot of videos with this title are about really hyped up books, rather than books you actively would not have read or not have found if not for Booktube. And I realize that some of the books I did talk about are very hyped up, but I probably still wouldn't have read them if not for specific booktubers I mentioned. So if you want to do something like this, I do urge you to go through your reading since starting to watch Booktube and pick out some of the highlights, some books you would have not heard of or not selected to read on your own for whatever reason if not for Booktube, and just discuss your experiences with them. If you need some structure to your discussion, try answering questions like, where did you hear about these? What do you think the barriers were that prevented you from reading them on your own? Why did you finally decide to pick them up? And why did you love them so much? Have reading these books inspired you to read any others? I think these are more or less the kinds of things I discussed. So yes, I tag Claudia from Spinster's Library, of course, for inspiring me to make this video, as well as the rest of the booktubers I mentioned. I would also love to see Petra from Petra U and Mary from Happily Ever Esh, Tilly, Megan Hannett do this type of video, and really anyone else who is excited about this idea. I'd love to see you make your own version as well. So I guess I'm making it a tag video, but it's sort of an unofficial tag video, if you will. So that's it, and until next time, I look forward to seeing you in another video soon. Bye!